Hey folks, welcome to the Wine Foundry in Napa Valley, California. We are a boutique-owned, family-owned winery making custom wines for people all over the world with grapes from some of the most sought-after vineyards in California. This week, my colleague Stuart Acre and our winemaker Patrick Saboe are very excited to explore ground zero for world-worthy Cabernet Sauvignon by diving into the Rutherford AVA, or American Viticulture area. Patrick is currently joining us from G3 Vineyard in Rutherford, and will soon trek a few miles north to check in on our other Rutherford vineyard that we work with called Melrose. And in addition to learning about these two prominent vineyard sites, we're also going to chat about flowering and bloom, which is in some stages happening. We'll find out today if it's happening in these sites. And if not, it's going to be happening very, very soon. It's the next phase of the growing cycle. And then we'll also explore the next few months of the growing season that lead up to harvest. And later on towards the end, we're excited to announce a new vineyard property that we are adding into our 2020 vineyard guide, or have added in there actually just I think today or yesterday. So for now, open a bottle of wine, make yourself comfortable, kick back, relax, and let's have some fun.
Cheers, Steve. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers, Patrick. Thank you for taking one for the team and being out there under 90 degrees sun in Rutherford right now. Hey, so flowering is almost upon us. First of all, have you seen any evidence of flowering at G3? And if you haven't, I mean, if you could kind of show us what's going on with the buds and kind of walk us through flowering.
Yeah, so flowering we're still a little bit away from flowering. It's still close. We are getting, it's probably within the next couple of weeks. If you can see this, the flowers are underneath this cap. So there's a cap on top of the flowers. You know, if you recall from our previous conversation, let's see if I can get that the right distance there, so you can see it. The cap, the flowers of a grapevine are called dioecious, and so which means they have both female and male parts. And so underneath the cap is on the outside is the stamen. So the stamen is like this on the outside with all the pollen on the outside, and the pistil is where the pollen falls straight down onto the pistil. So they are self-pollinating. And so at this point, the cap the cap literally gets pulled off of the top of releasing the flowers to be able to pollinate. And so we're not quite there yet. We're still probably, my guess is, maybe 10 days or so away from flowering at this point on this block. And so, but it's not far from happening. As you can see, they're all pretty even, and all the vines, you know, these vines here are fairly old. As you recall from our previous conversations, that they are quadrilateral cordon. As you see, the trunk there is one big giant trunk. These were planted in the 90s. And so, and vines can really essentially live as long as you like them to live until they get sick, or you want to have new clones, or you want a market-driven kind of demand for it. But this is what's called a quadrilateral cordon. And so the trunk, one main trunk here, split into 4 sections. And so back in the 70s through the 90s, particularly, the mindset on valley floor properties particularly was to have bigger vines, larger spacing in there. As you see, there's almost 10 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet in between there. And so the tractors can go down the middle of the row. And this is called a Gdc system. And so, excuse me, a lyre rather. And this is again, 4 cordons coming off there. And so each one of them having, these are the arms and these are the cordons every 6 to 8 inches or so. And so, can you see that okay? And so off of each one is a spur, a 2-bud spur. So here's the spur right here, and you have 2 buds that grow for this year. So you see this shoot here and this shoot over here. And so what you end up having, each one of these spaces, 2 shoots. You can see from each one of those. And so it's very nicely, they've already come through and taken any extra suckers and shoots away. They'll have to do it multiple times throughout the year because the grapevine will want to push from different spots. As you can kind of see maybe for here, there's a little bud that comes in, and you want to, and so they'll come through here and then just literally come and thumb this off with their finger to try to keep it from growing any additional extra spots. We're trying to keep the vine in balance. So we want to.
You just saved the entire vintage right there for us, Patrick. Good job.
Reducing yields.
Reducing yield. So we'll come through and they do it already. You can see it's very clean already, but they'll have to do it multiple times. The vines, particularly on the grape, on the valley floor, are very fertile. And so, you know, the soils down here are alluvial, meaning that they come from river plains and things. And so the water, the hills are in the background. If you can kind of see, the hills are just up above us. And so down in the valley on both sides, the Vaca range, which is, I'm pointing to the east here and looking at the Vaca range. And then over here on the other side is the Mayacamas. And so which splits Napa and Sonoma. And so on both the loam, the silt and the clay from the top of the hills comes down through erosion over time. So the valley floor is much, much more fertile. So back in the day, as I said, they used to go with higher, bigger vines. Now they actually go with larger density. And so they go with smaller vines and higher density planting. So it's just shifted a little bit. The quality is similar. It's just harder to farm this way because the grapes are all up at eye level, as you see. I'm standing up, right? And so they're all at face level as opposed to waist level, which is what most modern vines are done. And so it's just a little bit more efficient to farm that way. And so they're going to, and for logistics purposes, at some point, probably pull this block out and replant it to bilateral cordons with VSP, vertical shoot positioning. So it's just a matter of, it's not a matter of quality. They'll get similar quality. It's just a matter of farming logistics and being able to farm everything in a similar way. So the old ways, shifted a little bit.
And I've noticed when I'm out at the property that G3, which is about 300 acres, has both bilateral cordon and the quads out there. So
that's correct.
You think they're going to kind of move all to bilateral cordon?
They will. Yeah, they definitely will. So we buy about 3 to 4 acres of the 200, and I think they have 230 or 270 or something like that planted, and we buy roughly a handful of those. And so but this will be yes, at some point this will be pulled out to do into, and we'll go with tighter row spacing. They have narrower tractors now, and so they go with, everything is tighter than it used to be. But it's similar quality wise, though. It's a shame because it is pretty amazing. It's almost like a forest of grapevines as you stand below. It looks like you're looking through the trees that are majestic. And so you see the vines. I mean, the canes are only about 18 inches long at this point, but they will go upwards of 3 to 4 feet. And as I said, we're probably about 1 to 2 weeks away from flowering happening here. Flowering will take about 2 weeks or so. And so that puts us coming into early October, likely for harvest time. And so normally it's right around the end of the first week of October, and it's probably a few days earlier than that this year, but similar time frame. And so things look beautiful. As you said, it is a warm late spring, mid-late spring day, almost 90 degrees up here in Rutherford. But boy, it's hard not to like this position because it's a pretty cool spot.
So Patrick, I think we will bid you adieu while you hop in your car, turn on your air conditioning, and head north.
Are you packing? Are you using sunscreen, Dr. Saboe?
I am definitely using sunscreen. So, well, I will see you guys in a few minutes. I'm going to make the journey up to Melrose. It'll only take me a couple of minutes, so I'll be back on in just a few. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Drive safe.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, Stu, we've got a couple questions here. Should we get into those?
Yes, sure. So one of the things was, there's a couple of questions. So one of the things is Libby Louise asks, how do they treat for pests? Steve, do you want it or do you want me to grab it?
You can grab that one, but hi, Libby.
Hi, Libby. How are you doing? So there's a couple of different ways. So at G3 and in a number of properties, they'll see what I refer to as raptor boxes. They have basically bird houses to attract like hawks and falcons who help deal with any ground pests. I was out there, oh gosh, it was maybe a couple of months ago, kind of the whole surreal last 6-week stretch. And we did see a little coyote came over and was checking us out. But really the ones that we'd be worrying about would be, well, I guess if you're looking at the microbial level, you'd be worried about mold. And that's why you see, we consider that a pest. That's why we kind of keep those canopies open so we get really good airflow. The sun also really helps on that valley floor. And then encouraging hawks that will take care of any ground characters. Steve, does that kind of answer the question you think for Libby there?
Yep,
Okay.
that's where I would have gone. And to answer Bruce's question about why G3 commands such a high price, since it's a fairly large vineyard. So the answer there is pretty much because it can. So, they sell all of that fruit. It's, arguably the second most famous vineyard next to Tokelon in Napa Valley. And so we're extremely fortunate with our relationship with them to be able to source it in the manner that we do and to be able to get as much as we do. And really, it's got such big pedigree, and it is also the site of the first bonded winery, going back to below. BV was like 1839, I think.
Yeah, way back. Back.
So it's extremely historic. It's a a heritage site in their portfolio. So yeah, that would be that. And then Chris, to answer your question about how many tons per acre on the valley floor at G3, for the blocks that we source from, it's about 3 to 4, maybe 3.5 is probably the best answer. It does look like it does look like there was another question on here about, is it too early to guess the size of this vintage from Gray? So Stu, you want to take that?
Yeah, so what a few minutes ago, or Patrick was talking about flowering, right? And I put up a little screen share of the flowering. You could see tiny, they're really, really small little flowers. That's going to be kind of a critical phase for us to determine yield, because each one of those flowers, if it pollinates, and again, Patrick kind of talked about how grapevines are hermaphroditic, so we don't need bees or anything. Each one of those has a potential to become a grape. And so during that flowering phase, which is a few days long, a week plus, we typically kind of keep our fingers crossed for good weather. Thankfully, in Napa, we when people come out, we complain. It was like in the wintertime, it was 40 degrees today. Compared to many places on the planet, it was 40 degrees in the morning, right? And then it gets up to 63, 64 in the wintertime. So we have actually very few variables to do that. However, if there was, let's say, a wind event which kind of prevented the grape from kind of fertilizing and developing, that you can get kind of an uneven fruit set, and we'll talk about fruit set later. But even wine growers don't like that because it would reduce their yield. However, winemakers don't always fight it because winemakers are kind of the mind that the reduced yield, those grapevines, all those leaves you saw, can help us kind of get more efficient photosynthesis relative to the crop load, which means kind of more ripening within there. So that's kind of what we're looking at. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, and there's another one from Peter about what differences are happening this year because of COVID so far in the vineyard, and also are there any other grapes grown at G3? No, G3 is Cabernet Sauvignon exclusively. It's part of, it's I think Patrick mentioned between 250 to 270. I think it's 251 acres are planted there. It is a 300-acre property, and it's all Cabernet Sauvignon. And as far as differences this year because of COVID in the vineyard, there aren't any. We haven't seen any from the vineyards we source from. These are all companies that have very established crews. So they're able to completely, tend to the vines and be out there doing everything. There are definitely folks with either smaller vineyards or more like the kind of hobby vineyards, or maybe they're run by less professional companies or vineyard management companies that don't always carry a permanent crew. But these are, these vineyards are so well established that their crews are, permanently on there. They'll staff up for harvest season, but yeah, there's been no difference out there.
And then one last question but then we should kind of jump into Melrose because Patrick will be arriving. But then somebody kind of asked, like, when you do replant, first of all, vineyards are they're doing replanting blocks all the time. And like Patrick said, sometimes it has to do with yield. If the yield gets so small that it's not economically viable, they'll do that. Or a lot of people are kind of replanting to bilateral cordon because it's just more efficient and easier to get even ripening. So the question kind of depends on how long. If you're going to graft on top of an existing vine, you could, foreseeably get a crop even that year, right? But realistically, if they're going to replant, take those vines out and kind of reorient the vines, you're looking at 3 years before you'll have a Native American rootstock that is native to North America because it's resistant to a louse that lives in the soil. And then they would graft the Cabernet on top of that. And then you'd be looking at 3 years before getting a crop of grapes off of there. I'm going to shift gears, Steve, and because we're going to be moving into Melrose. You worked with David Mitchell or David Michael, the head viticulturalist with Beckstoffer, to get us this property. So hey, walk us through that story. And it's still in Rutherford. It's only a couple miles away as the crow flies. How do we get this fruit?
Well, so it's still, and we'll explore this more, I'm sure, when Patrick's in the vineyard, but it's almost in St. Helena. It's literally on the, very edge of the AVA. And it also, I think, produces a very different wine. And whether it's on the palate and the finish, very different than G3. But Dave and I, we work out our contract for G3, and he reached out about Melrose. It's a property that they, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, had decided they liked the potential of it. They wanted to, oh, nice, Stu, you're dialing it in on the maps. Could you show that map again, please?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Sure.
Yeah, it was a little brief. Anyhow, he reached out to see if we'd be interested in sourcing from it. They had changed the way they farm it so that they're now farming it the same way. And I think they started it 5 years ago or so, farming it the same way as the heritage vineyards, which are the Tokelon and Dr. Crane and all of those. And, but they didn't have any branding for it. So they'd been, putting it out there to a few different producers. But one of the nice things about our client base is that they oftentimes are collectors and appreciators of fine wines and also know their stuff. And so he thought it was a nice thing to be able to brand it a little bit to our client base. So asked if we wanted to take that front, I think it's the A block, or maybe it's block 1. I can't remember off the top of my head. But so we take that whole block there and have since 2018. And I think we've been really pleased with it. Well, I'm drinking a barrel sample of the 18 right here, but yeah, so that's how it happened. Dave's a great guy to work with, extremely, fair, interesting, talented. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Hey, thanks for bringing that up. And then if we, I'm going to I'll pull up a photo of Melrose, and then Steve, just look, Rutherford itself, it's like 6,500 acres. As I bring up this thing, what is like the key characteristic of, in your opinion, of what makes Melrose, or Rutherford? I should say Rutherford. What is Rutherford really?
I'm sorry, I was answering a question on the Q&A.
Sorry about that. I was just going to kind of ask, in your opinion, what makes Rutherford, like, why is Rutherford its own thing?
Yeah, so Well, there's a factual reason. I'll start with that. Rutherford is become so synonymous with high-end cab, even more so than Oakville. And a lot of people say that it's because it has the most radiant days and hours of sunlight. So in the growing scene, you know, with viticulturists, they refer to solar days and hours and all of that. And it's got over 3,000 in the growing season, 3,000 solar hours or radiant hours. And that's the most in Napa Valley because it is also the widest AVA. And so that's why it gets that. It's kind of at the two most wide points between the ranges. And then you also, you know, there's this thing about Rutherford Dust. So, you know, we can kind of talk about that a little bit. Some people think it's marketing shtick. Some people think that it's, hey, Patrick's back. But Rutherford Dust is, I think it was coined by the late great Andre
Chelichev.
Yep.
Andre the Giant.
Andre, not Andre the Giant. But I guess they're both.
Oh, I was hoping it was Andre the Giant.
Chelichev was a wrestler, though.
He wrestled vines, and so you know he would always talk about the terroir and how Rutherford, you could always kind of taste this you know dirt, and people would say it like forest floor and yeah, a little bit of spice in the soil, and that would really come through in Rutherford more so than anyone else. There's also, I think there's another, like detractors kind of take another approach though. Yeah, Stu?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, you know, Napa Valley's really kind of become Napa Valley you know, in the late 60s, moving into the 70s. And so there was kind of a knock on Napa as being kind of a wind-blown farming town, right? And so, and then the theory or the idea was that, you know, we as you know, we get really blustery afternoon winds, and it was kind of choked with dust. And so some detractors will say that the Rutherford Dust was just, it was like a kind of a cowpoke town. And then they used marketing spin to be like, instead of the Rutherford Dust, it was like, oh, the Rutherford Dust, kind of a shift. You know, but you definitely get something on the palate that just makes it distinguishing. Even on the east side of the valley or the west side of the valley, you can kind of tell. Hey, Patrick, you are in Melrose.
I am. So Melrose, beautiful spot also, just a couple of miles north of George III. G3 is just a couple miles south of us, but the soil conditions are just slightly loamier here. And so the fruit profile is just a little bit different than what the G3 brings. The G3 is lush and very new world driven. I think that the in a delicious, amazing way. And the Melrose is maybe just a touch more balanced. I see a little bit more red and blue fruit, and the profile overall is just a touch less of the lush on the palate, but a little bit more structure maybe, and a little bit more of the balance, I think, of it. So depending on preference of style, I think that they are both very attractive. Steve and I tasted them just a few minutes ago, side by side, and they both have, of the 18s that is, and really nice, just slightly different, you know. And so the lushness on the G3 is pronounced and very prominent, whereas the balance on the Melrose is very pronounced, I'd say. And so for those that are looking for a touch less of the huge kind of new world or really ripe profile, then I think that the Melrose is an attractive option for them for sure. And so it's hard to say which one is better because they're just different, you know, even though only a couple. Yeah, I mean, the same owner, same farming kind of technique. Now you can see this vines are more modern. These are younger vines, and they're done to the bilateral cordon, right? So each one of these arms cordon, and so then you have two of them side, you know, and this is what's done more currently now as far as ease of logistics. And so keeping the vine very much two-dimensional down the row, and so you can open up the vines and splay them, horizontally. And so it's really done more common in a lot of fruit farming across the world, really, and not just with grapes, but so this is what a lot of the G3 already looks like, actually similar kind of style. And this is what the block that we're working with currently will be shifted over to. It will be a tighter spacing, and this is about 6 feet apart as opposed to, I don't know if you can really tell from perspective, but this is about 6 feet width as opposed to like 9 feet on the previous G3 block that we were working with currently. So it will be that the row spacing too on the G3 will be updated to be more like 5 or 6 feet apart, not 8 to 10 feet apart.
Just as the kind of the COVID shelter at home thing kicked in, I was up there, so just a little bit after bud break, and saw Philip. We maintained social distancing, but at that time, Melrose looked to be like 2 days or 3 days ahead of G3, but now it looks like G3 actually has more leaf growth. Is there any evidence of flowering right now?
No, there's no flowering. I actually think that Melrose is about a week to a week and a half behind
now.
G3 now. Yep.
Even on the north side. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And so there's still, again, the cap is all on on all of these. As you can see, you would see little tiny filaments where the flower, where the stamen is projecting outward, and on the end of the stamens where the pollen is, and then it falls down into the pistil for to flower, to fertilize the flower. Then the grape forms, of course, and we'll have fruit set, and we'll decide how much. But on the cluster, one other thing I wanted to point out and can see is the spacing of the little parts of the cluster. As you see, it seems like it's pretty spacious throughout, the stem there. However, of course, they haven't grown yet, and so you need space to be able to fill in. And so they look very sparse initially until you get grape growth, of course, and then they will expand and fill completely out. But it's interesting to see them on the cluster form because it seems very sporadic, or not at all even throughout until the grapes start forming, and then that will all be a full cluster for you. So,
hey Patrick, we have I'm sorry. Sorry for jumping in. We got a question from Ophelia, who is either joining us from Tin or from Tennessee. Hey, with the vines being, excuse me, no. So what are the big concerns that are going to be coming in during flowering? So what are we worried about?
Yeah, so flowering, the main thing for us, luckily in California, Northern California particularly, the weather patterns is so stable, so we don't usually get much of any rain. That being said, they do have forecasted a few days of rain, perhaps next week. So rain and or heavy wind could be the two main problems. And the third problem would be a frost. So also unlikely at this point, however, still possible. And so you can still get a late frost. So anything that's green, of course, and you get below 32 degrees for extended period of time, that will all burn. And so you can get some loss of fruit or some foliage and canopy if they burn, right? The other thing that could possibly happen on a warm day like this is if you spray fertilizer or sulfur on the vines for mildew protection. So now that they're over 12 inches of growth, typically when you start seeing fruit, about every 2 weeks now, they're going to use some sort until the fruit turns color in veraison. Which is usually in July or August for this site, probably more like August and so they'll be every 2 weeks or so they'll spray some sort of fungicide to even though the especially today and right now the humidity is very low, but in the mornings and in the evenings the moisture content in the air goes up significantly. And so in the valley where there's where the air can kind of sit down on the valley floor, you can see those were the areas where you'd get any type of frost damage. So it's unlikely, but that is the third kind of, issue that you might have. So the first one, as I said, is either rain or heavy winds. And then that way you would lose some of the grapes would not form correctly because they would not self-pollinate. So, whereas we're about 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, I'd say, out from the cap popping off of the end of these little hard little buds, as you can kind of see there. And so soon the calyptra or the cap, as I said, sits down right on top of over the top. It's like it literally sits on top of the flower, and that'll just literally peel off, and then the flower will have, flowering's about 1 to 2 weeks typically. Sometimes it can be under cooler conditions, might take upwards of 3 weeks or so, but usually it's within a couple of weeks once you start it. And so my guess is that won't start here for another 2 to 3 weeks or so, and then it'll. So we're looking at in early June probably for this site for flowering.
Hey, Patrick.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in with a question from Peter? So this was actually asked back when you were at G3, but and he was referencing that he knows there's multiple clones planted at that vineyard as well as in most vineyards. Absolutely. And any insights into the different clones as far as what's planted where and why within a site?
Yeah, so it's clonal impact is important, but it's also the clonal rootstock combination that is really, those two things are the driving factors behind most people's decisions on where they plant or what clone they plant is usually what rootstock, and then most rootstocks have range of clones that work well or don't work well within it, and so you would want to stick with the ones that have shown with good. They work well together, and so sometimes the vines don't pair well. So at the bottom of the vine, I think we talked about this in a previous discussion, but we'll look down here at the bottom, and you'll see that the swelling of the what's called the graft.
Can you go in a little closer?
Sure.
So we can see more graft and less Patrick. Perfect.
And so I think Patrick is really nice looking, but that's okay.
He is.
So this is you can see the swelling of so below ground. This rootstock, I don't know the name of it, unfortunately, for the video. I don't want to lie to you, so I'm not going to make it up. But so the above ground is it's the below ground. It's two different species typically, North American species that are grafted together for different reasons, for either pest resistance or drought resistance, could be due to nematodes or phylloxera resistance. There's multiple vineyard factors or decisions that you would use different clones, different rootstocks, and different varietals that have the potential to grow well under those conditions. So this is valley floor again.
You're on 3309 in that field.
3309. Very good. That's the perfect one.
337 on 3309.
3309 is a devigorating site rootstock. So what I mean by that is that, again, because I mentioned the valley floor is very vigorous, and so the tendency of the vine is to get big and very mostly on vegetative growth, and so the ripeness can be impacted and negatively so, and then a less ripe sort of way if the vine grows too vegetatively rather, and not enough focus on the fruit, which is really what we're hoping for. And then, so these vines are done. So it's better to, when you're on the valley floor, to use rootstocks that are less vigorous, like the 3309, which would help to balance out the load of the fruit without having too much vigor, and you'd have to be stressing with your logistics of farming. So a lot of farming is logistics and dealing with your water levels and your overall kind of balancing the load and trying to make things. The B word is, in the case of farming and winemaking, is balance. And so you're trying for that happy balance of enough canopy and enough fruit, but with keeping the profile that the wines that the grapes you're trying to grow. So this is probably the most famous grower in the world certainly outside of Europe, but likely even including Europe. This particular owner, the gentleman of the vineyards that we were talking about, both G3 and Melrose, is the only one typically of a grower that anyone even knows their name. And so you're talking about working the opportunity to work with either of these vineyards is world class, and it's amazing opportunity. I've been working with this fruit with Melrose for the last couple of years, and with G3 for the last decade, and it is just, as Steve and Stu probably already said, incredible opportunity, and it's definitely a something that you can only see, you can only experience when you come out here and taste with us. So I encourage you to come and taste with me. Come check out the vineyard, to come, more importantly, taste the barrel samples. And I'm not going to have to sell you, or no one will, on any of these wines, because they're both stunning, really nice.
So Patrick, I don't want to make you keep sweating, but if you want to stay on to answer any questions, we do have just a couple here. Do you mind?
Not at all.
Okay.
Oh, there's my hand.
So just a kind of general one, which I guess you could answer a few different ways, but how long is the growing process?
The growing process each year, you mean? From bud break
I
to?
think so, yeah.
Yeah. So typically, it depends on depends on where you are in our area. Bud break typically starts in March or April, and then you pick in September, October. And so you're talking about 6 months, a little over, depends on the varietal. Some a little bit less, but roughly 180 days. Some will touch more than that from the start to the finish. It's really not so much from the start, it's really from flowering. That's the critical part. The flower, the plant has a internal clock of sorts that kind of the timer starts. And so especially with conditions, many of you on the call probably have heard me say this before, but the conditions out here are like the Groundhog Day, the movie, where every single day is the same thing over and over and over, which makes for perfect growing conditions for fruit, particularly wine grapes in our case. And it's just stunning. The conditions are perfect. That's why the wines are so good. You can farm so much more easily here, and the winemaking is a lot easier too, because the grapes are amazing. You just have to kind of not mess things up. So it's a really much better place to start than a lot of the others. But it's roughly 6 months or so from the time it starts to it finishes.
So people have also asked, and I think it was on here earlier, and we may have blown past it, but the difference between the sites and how, as you and I tasted today, tasting the barrel samples of the 18 and bye Patrick.
Oh, sorry.
Hi Patrick.
Yeah, don't push that button.
Yeah,
sorry,
don't push the self-destruct button. But you and I tasted the 18 G3 and sample of the 18 Melrose, and they're extremely different, as you touched on earlier. And somebody asked earlier, so I'll jump in there and see if you have a different take. But there's a little bit more clay in the soil up at Melrose, and so therefore it's got a little less of the kind of opulence of the traditional valley flora that G3 really exhibits. And so it's got, in my opinion, it's got a little bit more structure. So for me, I prefer that on Melrose. I think it's killer. But
and acid too. I mean, the acid's way racier.
Yeah,
it is.
Works for me.
Yeah. So again, most of you, if not all of you on the call, already know that the more acid you have, the redder, bluer the fruit. Right. The lower the pH, the higher the acid, the redder the fruit profile gets, and it goes red, blue, black. And so the higher the pH, the lower the acid, the darker the fruit profile. And so if you had to just characterize the fruit profile, I'd say that the Melrose is more red and blue, and that's a generalization of general, but
What's the red black?
It's more blue black on the G3. Yeah, it's very little red fruit on the G3, mostly to do with pH, but also to do with the clonal differences as well. They're not the same clones, not the same age of vine, and about 3 miles apart as crow flies. And as you said, the slightly loamier clay loam soils here, but they're moreover, I think it's just slight variances in soil patterns and clonal differences that makes the difference in the wines themselves. I said the growing conditions are almost identical between the two of them. Actually, interestingly today, although it's 10 minutes later, the degree went from 90 to 88 in my car. Usually the further up valley you go, the warmer it would be. For whatever reason, my car said it was only 88 today in Melrose. So beautiful day. As you see, it's hard not to be appreciative of the surroundings. If you could hear all the birds, and nobody's out here. Everyone's socially distanced from me right now. So it's a pretty special place to be. But I'm going to see you guys later on down the road next week.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks,
Drive
Patrick.
safe.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
You got it. Safe travels. I was chomping at the bit to be. I've been locked up in this house for 7 weeks, man, and just to be walking the vines, it's definitely something I'm looking forward to doing. Hey, Steve. So we're about to have flowering, and we're having some flowering at some of our sites, but not here in Rutherford yet. So first comes flowering. Then if you what I'll do is I'll pull up some slides if you want to walk us through, and we can kind of bounce it back and forth if that's fair. So what's going to be happening after flowering in the next couple of weeks?
So after flowering, we're going to get into fruit set. So, say flowering were to start today in Vineyard Y, whatever. And then it's going to go for about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks or so. And then we'll get into fruit set, which is when we can really kind of estimate the crop load. And so it's a very tentative part, as Patrick mentioned earlier, of the growing season. We're, always hoping for, mild temperatures, nothing too cold, nothing too windy. We don't want winds to come through, knock the flowers off and reduce the yield. We don't want, that's called shatter. We don't want, a frost to come and kill off any of the flowers that would then yield and shatter as well. So it's always, everything looks great here for the next, we can see out on the weather about the next 2 weeks. Everything looks all high 70s to high 80s, and the nights not getting below like 50, 52. So, and not big windstorms. So hopefully that all holds. There are definitely schools of thought of shatters still okay, because it's just, for us, we commit to being able to make wine for X number of people per vineyard. And so when there is a lower yield, then whoever's like the last 1 or 2 people to get their production agreement into us, we have to, Stu has to make a phone call to them and tell them, sorry, we don't have that fruit.
Not pleasant. Hey, going back to that fruit set, I'm not going to pull the photo back up, but you saw those little green pellets. Those, they are not, first of all, grapes are about the size of blueberries or smaller, right? So between maybe Pinot Noir is just like bigger than a pea, but smaller than a blueberry. Cabernet Sauvignon, mostly about small blueberry size. But those little pellets that I was showing you, those are not much bigger than a BB, and it's
right.
So it's kind of hard to get that perspective. They are tiny and they are hard as rock. And then we'll move into July, and the next phase is veraison. What happens there?
So that's where the fruit's going to go ahead and start turning color. So on red fruit in particular, there we go. So that looks like it's about 90, 80, 85% through.
Almost all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, up in the upper left, I guess you can see a bit more green in there still, but on that cluster in particular, can you go back to it one more time?
I was going to see if I could pull up a better one for you, okay. but let's get that one again. Yeah, hold on one second. Sorry about this. As you can tell, isn't it great that I am the person managing the technology, the least prolific tech person on the planet here. Here we go.
So you can see. There's a little hen there.
Shot berry there.
Yep. And but you can see the varying degrees of the change. And so obviously it starts green, and then it'll get a little closer to a yellow, and then more towards that where Stu's doing it there, which looks a little more like a red table grape almost right there. And then into the Cabernet Sauvignon. I believe that looks like G3 right there. Is it still?
It is. Yeah. It was a shot we grabbed at G3 last year.
Nice.
And then
and that's really kind of exciting, because from there you can kind of set a clock for the most part onto a rough estimate of when to harvest, and that's when we kind of have these sort of, I don't know, they're kind of national holidays within the industry, where you have bud break, which is just kind of like, yay, things are happening, the vines are awake and cool things happening, and then going into flowering and fruit set, and that can kind of blow by a little bit. And then when veraison comes on, that's where it's really quite cool. And we see it on our commutes where passing through these vineyards, then all of a sudden you just notice so much more red in there, and it's fun. So that's a great shot there, Stu, as well. That was probably 10% through.
10%, but it was funny that it was only a matter of 3 days. So it was just like, just kind of funny how once those grapes start coloring, it's just a march. And the reason is they're green because it's a defense mechanism, right? We know the whole role of a grape is to get eaten by a bird and then have that seed deposited somewhere else for propagation. But so the grapes try to protect themselves by not being ripe enough and not being desirable for an animal or a bird, or in our case, winemakers to get them. So it's this rush right at the very end.
And here I thought it was all photosynthesis.
Well, look, there's, I'm anthropomorphizing the grapes, the thing, but it really is. It's like, it's a protection method to allow for propagation, right? Hey, I have, I actually have Harvest from G3, if you want to kind of march into Harvest a little bit.
Sure.
A video.
I'm not ready for Harvest right now, though.
Oh, you're not? You're not ready to jump in?
I'm not ready.
People have been asking about, what it's like with COVID right now and how that will impact things. I mean, the production team is at work. There's only a few of us that have been, I drew the short straw. So I've been working from here, which is very inspiring, let me tell you, compared to being and seeing all the action at the winery and just not being able to pull barrel samples and having them delivered to the house or zipping up there with my mask on. And so I'm looking forward to kind of moving into that next phase. So tell us about Harvest, and then I'll play like just a short minute from G3 at like 5:30 in the morning.
So Harvest, I think most folks on here know that it'll come when Patrick makes the call to pick the fruit. And it works basically, he uses the numbers from the lab as a guide, but it's all driven on sensory. And so he'll make the call, we'll schedule it. We know what we're going into logistically as far as tanks and the winery, but I think really the video, if it's the video I think you have, you just go to it, because it's pretty amazing seeing professional vineyard workers harvest fruit, how fast it is, how meticulous they are, especially at these properties as well.
Unfortunately, I did not go to YouTube. I went to StuTube. So unfortunately, it's going to be Stu basically standing there stuttering. So I apologize for that. So it's anything but dramatic. We'll go to it. This is 5:30 in the morning at G3.
Good morning, Foundryans. We are the H1 block at G3. It's time for picking early in the morning here, and the crews are on top of it. Like snip, 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 just cut. Then they drop them into what the affectionately referred to as the FYBs, although these are white bins, not yellow. I don't know if you can see it here because it's so really dark. They drop those bins the back of a macro bin. That tractor goes down to the end of the row, puts it on the back of our truck, and we're just zipping through here. They're so efficient, so good, and their cuts are so clean that they don't enter any like potential areas for disease vectors. The fruit looks so good, guys. You're psyched. I'm psyched, and it's a beautiful morning out here in Rutherford. Can't wait to get the fruit back to the winery.
All right.
You're psyched. I'm psyched. Guys, so professional, and yeah, it's always one take, right? So there might be problems with that.
All right, sorry if that was a little glitchy or splotchy there, folks. It was on my screen, but hopefully you get the idea.
I hadn't had enough coffee yet on that morning.
Yeah. So Stu, what is for those in the audience? What does FYB stand for?
Freaking yellow bins. Because they fill up really quickly. You don't want the bins too large, because otherwise it becomes really difficult to carry. So they're really small, and so it's like boom, boom, boom. It's full. So they're freaking yellow bins. Yep.
And then you run them down to a larger half-ton bin, dump it in, run it back, and fill it up again. And I'd say each time they fill it, it's probably 25, 30 pounds worth of fruit.
Yeah.
In there,
yeah.
Right?
They're definitely working. And it's amazing because they're just sprinting along. It's beautiful. And speaking of beautiful, Steve Ryan, I think you have a special announcement today, is what I understand. There's a new addition coming to the Wine Foundry family.
Oh, yes. Well, Stu, I'm about 4 months along. And
congratulations, Steve.
It's going to be a baby grape. I was not sure what you were talking about there as you kind of transitioned into this. So yeah, we did add a vineyard. Patrick and I went out and met with Chris and Larry Hyde from Hyde Vineyard and Hyde Family Vineyard. We are getting some Napa Valley Syrah, technically Los Carneros region of Napa Valley. And it is cane pruned, VSP, trellised, awesome Syrah. It's in the 2020 Vineyard Guide. You can check out Hyde de Villaine or HDV to see it or to try wines from that site. They've got fantastic wines if you can find it. And then KO Wines. Yeah, I think he got a 94 and 95 in Spectator on his last vintage, which he makes at our facility as well. KO does a fantastic vineyard designate from that site. But it's pretty awesome. We've been wanting to work with the Hyde family for a while, and there's a specific set of blocks that we really wanted to try to get into, and there's four different blocks that we wanted to get into, and one of them came available, so we grabbed it, and it's now in the Vineyard Guide. So if anybody has any questions about that, they can reach out to Stu or me, and we'd be happy to answer them.
I was really excited when word got out that we might have access to Hyde Vineyard, because one of the most famous Syrah sites in the New World. So and it's close to the winery, close to home, so we can keep our eyes on it. Patrick's going to pass it twice a day on his way to and from work. Hey, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Wine Foundry Wednesdays from Rutherford, from G3 and Melrose. Next week, we're going to be kind of staying in Rutherford a little bit, because we're going to be meeting with lauded winemaker Frederick Johansson. Fred is the winemaker for Staglin Family Vineyards. And so we'll be discussing philosophy, viticulture, and winemaking philosophy with one of the top names in the industry. And if you're not familiar with Staglin Family, like, the wines are tough to come by, but lauded. And they also have such an amazing philanthropic portion of their, it's something that the winery is really committed to. They've raised over $1 billion right now for mental health research, and so just wonderful, really good thing, and we're lucky to be good friends with them. And then this Friday, part 2 of our Fatal Attraction, How Cabernet Was Born. Last week we talked about Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. And in just a couple of days, we'll be tasting 2 interpretations of Cabernet Sauvignon from the lineup. Might be some scheduling changes coming on the horizon, so keep an eye on your inbox. And then the 3rd Thursday of each month, we're continuing our book group. And so our next one will be the 3rd Thursday. So that's the 21st of May, Bianca Bosker's Cork Dork. If you haven't gotten it yet, you can get it from any of the outlets, but the Napa Book Mine is sending them out. And this is a book you can read in about 8 minutes, because it's really fun, quick, breezy read. But we'd love to have you join us for that. Hey, again, if you have a lot of the content is driven by you, so send us emails, send us texts, call us with suggestions, and we'll try to find ways to incorporate it. Drop off anytime, but Steve and I will stay on for a couple of minutes and answer any questions that didn't get answered. And thank you, stay safe, and until next time, thanks a lot. Cheers.